Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Parish Art Museum. It's great to have such a wonderful turnout to celebrate Juneteenth here at the Parish Art Museum. My name is Corinne Ernie. I'm the Chief Curator here at the Parish, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce this program that we have in collaboration with the Eastville Community Historical Society and the Southampton African American Museum. So just a little bit about the program. We will screen 2 short films that are focused on the historic SANS neighborhoods, which stands for Sag Harbor Hills, Azarest, Nineveh, and the subdivisions, and how they came into being and have remained a heaven for African American families on the East End for generations. The screenings will then be followed by a panel discussion. And it gives me special joy that this particular program resonates with our current exhibition, Artists Choose Parish, which is on right now, and I hope you get to see this after the program. This is actually an exhibition in celebration of our 125th anniversary of the Parish Art Museum, and we asked 41 well-known artists with deep roots to the East End to choose works from our collection and to show them with their own works. So in this show, we have artists who in the past or the present have made SANS their home. So that's Romer Bearden, Nanette Carter, Claude Lawrence, Leslie Stratford, and Frank Wimberly. So you see, they're quite well represented here. I would like to now welcome Dr. Georgette Greer-Key. She is the Executive Director of Eastville, and she will introduce the program and the films. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I just want to thank and welcome those of you who have come today. I know that we always seem to sit with each other in our group. So I just wanted to note that turn around and say hello to somebody that you don't know. Introduce yourself to somebody you don't know. Okay, so that wasn't hard, right? And so I wanted to say welcome and happy Juneteenth to all of you. Yeah, clap it up for Juneteenth. This program is an American holiday, and I'm so happy that now it is being recognized nationally, and that we can come together and celebrate how far we have come, but we have a far way to go. And so when we think about emancipation and we think about Jubilee and Freedom Day, how we celebrate the ending of slavery in our country, it's about time that we have a holiday that recognizes all of that. So my name is Georgette Greer-Key, and I'm the Executive Director of Eastville Community Historical Society and one of the cultural partners. I have a lot of my Han members. Can my Han members stand up because I so appreciate your support? So we have Guildhall, we have West Hampton Beach Performance Center, we have Elka, who is just newly transitioning from Watermill. We have Brenda Simmons from the Southampton African American Museum, and of course, right here where we are today, Monica with the Parish Art Museum. So thank you for your continued support on the East End. So this film that we're going to be viewing today is a celebration of what comes out of struggle, what comes out of joy, what comes out of the pain and the rain. So when we think about our holidays, sometimes we think about the fact that if we talk about slavery, we talk about civil rights, we talk about the struggles. And yes, there's struggles, but at the end of the day, there's also some joy, right? And so that joy that we talk about is that collective spirit that we all have together to want to learn from each other, to do better, be better, and enjoy one another. And so this film celebrates that. It celebrates the triumph and successes of many people. It is called Home. It was done by App A21. You can view it after this if you want on Apple TV. Home, Season 2, Episode 5. And then we had the pleasure of working with New York Times Magazine to do another beautiful film. And I'm happy to say that the young people that were working on this film look like me. And so I felt the tremendous, and I could say they were from a younger generation, way younger generation than me. So just knowing that they had that pride in the work that they did, and it's you're going to see it, it's beautiful. And for them to come and want to learn more about what was possible and what is still possible. So with that, I want to thank all of you again, but especially I want to thank my panelists that we have here. We have Sarah Couts, you can wave your hand. We have Brenda Simmons, we have Bibi Granger, and we also have Renee Simon. So we will be called back up. But just remember, when you go home, if anyone asks you what you did today, tell them you were at a Juneteenth celebration, okay? Is this anyone's first Juneteenth celebration? Don't be shy, raise your hand. The only thing that I'm missing that I didn't bring is some strawberry soda, but you can learn about that at a different time. But see, that's just the beauty of this holiday, that we're celebrating it together. And so this film was actually released last year on Juneteenth. And so we weren't able to screen it then, because who knew in the 11th hour it became a national holiday. And when I tell you the events that happened, I could not fit it in, although this was something that was planned for us to screen this originally on Juneteenth, 2022. So thank you so much, and we can get rolling.
All right, well, this is a beautiful 2 films about the power of community, so thank you, Georgette, for bringing those to us. And I would like to introduce the panel now. So Georgette is part of it, and it's moderated by Brenda Simmons, the Executive Director of the Southampton African American Museum, and Renee Simmons, SANS Sag Harbor President, as well as Dr. Beverly Granger, Artist and SANS Resident, and Sarah Couts, a consultant, Cultural Resources and Preservation. So please welcome our panelists. Thank you.
Okay, so first of all, let's just give it another round of applause. I feel like the energy is so incredible. And also, you know, if we could also just think about the many people. When we think about preservation, we have to remember that P and the people. None of this will be possible without the people and their stories. So we have some people who appeared in the film. I know in the back we have Mr. Williams, E.T. Williams, along with his wife, Lynn. I don't know if they're still here. If you could raise your hand. And is there anybody else in the audience that was in the film? Please stand or raise your hand. Alyssa, where is she? Oh, thank you. So, and then I just want one more applause for, you know, our ancestors. Before we have the applause, can you turn to your neighbor and say, I am my ancestors' wildest dream? Yeah. I mean, really, you know, because that is really what we're doing here today. So while we turn on our mics, I just want to thank everybody. I hope you got the gist of the film and what we were able to do. Is everybody's mics on? I'll just switch with Brenda. Oh, it's on.
It's just awesome to see all these people here today on Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, everybody. My name is Brenda Simmons, and I am the founder and executive director of the Southampton African American Museum. And I'm proud to say it's the first African American site to be historically designated in the village of Southampton. And it's the first Black barbershop to be transformed into a museum in the country. It's been, it was a 16-year journey. I was born and raised in Southampton here, and I was determined to leave us a legacy. And I just want to read the mission statement, and then we're going to have this wonderful panel discussion. Our mission statement is to promote an understanding and appreciation of the African American culture by creating programs that will preserve the past, encourage learning, and enhance the life of the community. Southampton African American Museum, we research and collect local history, produce media events, and create exhibitions and community. So, we will start. You might need your glasses on. I used to fight this, but I can't fight it no more. Okay, Georgette, the first question is for you. We'll give a brief bio, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so some people were here already. My name is Georgette. I'm from Eastville Community Historical Society in Sag Harbor on 114. And a lot of the community of Eastville and the Historical Society was on view. We're an organization that started because in the early 70s when historic designation as a tool was being used in communities, if you ever came on the tour with me, I always say, where do you think the original lines for the Sag Harbor Historic District stopped? Anybody know the answer? My board president, Maria's here, she can't answer. She knows the answer. But it stopped a block before Eastville Avenue. And see, that is where the St. David AME Zion Church is. And it's the oldest church on its original footprint because some of the older churches are old, but they were moved. So we get that claim to fame. So in the 70s, the ladies of the community came together and said we have to do something about being included in the historic district, but also to preserve the church. And that's how Eastville got started in 1981. We received our charter. And we've been there ever since trying to preserve our history and also preserve who we are in a built environment in Sag Harbor. So I've been there since 2009, and as a result, I've been able to work with many of the communities around, some of the HAN members here, but also on a state and national level for Preservation League of New York State and also the Museum Association for New York. And so at Eastville, we've had ongoing events, and one of them that I'll mention just in case is the fish fry, which is a fundraiser, and I can't stop doing because so many people from the community comes to that. And so that's been around for 40 years. And so we're always looking to have conversations with our community and to continue the legacy and the work that many of the ladies and founding community members have started with Eastville. So we thank you for that.
And now I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to talk about your own personal experiences, careers, joys, hobbies, bios, and give us about 5 minutes.
Hi, everybody. Who is this on? Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Kautz. I've been an archaeologist, historical anthropologist, preservationist, educator for about 20 years. And that's brought me around the world to Amsterdam, South Africa, Japan, all around the United States. And I have to echo what Georgette said. Preservation, history, archaeology, it's about people. It seems like it's about things or buildings or architecture, but it's us that give those things meaning. So if everybody disappeared tomorrow and the buildings were left, there would be no historic districts. There would be no design because those are things that we give meaning to. Yeah, thank you for reminding everyone that. And that's why it's been such a pleasure for me to work with you all. I think about 7 years I've been working with you since I came back to Long Island. And I'm actually a native New Yorker. I'm from Queens, so I'm kind of a Long Islander too. But yeah, it's been wonderful to work with Brenda on the Fierce Concert project, and so fabulous to have San, and so it's been great to help this effort and to be part of the nomination for the State and National Register of Historic Places. So it's exciting to be here today. Thank you.
Okay, my turn.
That was just a little entertainment. Yeah. I'm Beverly Granger, as many of you saw me in both films. I am probably the longest resident of Sag Harbor Hills still living since Billy passed away. I've been there since 1951, every summer. And now I'm a full-time resident. Sag Harbor Hills, to me, has always been a place of comfort, of acceptance, and of great love. It's a community where everybody embraces each other and looks out for everyone else's well-being. By profession, I'm a dentist, and my goal was always to retire to Sag Harbor and pursue my other passion, which is pottery. And so that's what I've done. As an adult, I grew up in my parents' home. As an adult, I purchased another home in Sag Harbor Hills. Then when my mother passed away, my husband and I bought the house out of the estate and we did a renovation. And what I wanted was to have my pottery studio there, so I do. And that's where I spend a good part of my day, in the basement, creating, playing in the mud. But Sag Harbor Hills has always been a very special place. I speak of Sag Harbor Hills, Agerest and Nineveh, the residents there, I'm sure feel the same way about their particular subdivision. And I see a lot of faces here, they're saying, yeah. There's always a competition. What's best, Agerest, Sag Harbor Hills, Nineveh? But they're all collectively a place of comfort and celebration. And if you saw in the film, the art shows, we have renovated that. We have rejuvenated the art shows. We'll be having one that we benefit the Southampton African American Museum. And it's become quite an event. This is the third year coming up. We have expanded it. We will have 25 artists and authors of color, several of whom are in this room now. So it's just a fabulous place to be. Okay, thank you. First of all, many applause to the films. And I remember when the various directors and producers came in and they spoke to us. And I'm not in it, and I didn't want to, that wasn't the purpose. But my purpose was to say, if you can capture the sense of community, you have a home run. And I think they both really approached it that way and did deliver in it. So again, I wanted just to compliment the producers and directors and those who actually gave story and depth to what is happening here in Sag Harbor. Okay, so my name is Renee Simons. I came to Sag Harbor in college, actually. And to give you a sense of how old I am, which is very old, it was probably around 71 or so, maybe 69, I can't remember exactly. I don't know if I was married in 69, so it may have been right before then. And we went to Earl Graves' home. He's an Omega Psi Phi, as my husband is a fraternity, a black fraternity. And they were having a frat gathering, a reunion, and that was my first introduction to the area. And I was so impressed by the buildings and the fun, I always kept it in the back of my head. And later on in life, I had to make a decision about where we would like to go to recreate, to kind of have fun. And we came back to Sag Harbor in 2003. So we bought in 2003 and renovated in 2005 with my priority was to try to, as you did, keep the same footprint, but we wanted a second level, on and on. But with that said, sometime around 2014-15, I noticed that something was changing and the sense of community of new neighbors was a little bit different. One, there was a lot of rentals. And those of you who are out here in the Hamptons, you know about the rentals coming in. And while they appreciate the houses, it was a different climate. It's not the same sense of community that you've seen in the film. In addition to that, we saw developers come in, I think, thinking that they would maybe develop it for themselves, but in the end, sometimes to rent, but with the assumption that it was for themselves. We noticed that a lot of variances were being introduced into the decision of whether or not a house is demolished or not, or what could be done or not done. And I remember speaking to the then head of the ARB, who said to me, as I would go every month to the meeting and saying, but the rule is this, and you're doing this, and you're allowing that, and they
or changing the sense of community. And he said to me, well, Renee, that I hear what you're saying, but there's nothing there. Meaning all that you just heard about, the response was, there's nothing there of value. If you were something important, like a historic district, maybe we would pay more attention. So a little bit about my background. I'm 30 years business, right? So you're talking to all the things you hear about business people, working in banking and consumer products, and I'm a marketing person, et cetera, et cetera. So when I heard that, I was challenged. What do you mean there's nothing there? And if we were historic, then you would pay attention? And I remember looking around, I said, I know nothing about what to do. I said, but how hard could it be, right? So with that, I said I can research and I can find things out, and I did. And I realized that in speaking with state authorities and national authorities, and these two are advisors on this organization that we pulled together to try to see if there's anything there that we can substantiate greater protection. And working with the state, we found out that we were unique. And while this is beautiful, and you say this is wonderful, and all of you have that place probably in your heart with your own families, where you go to, whether it's a grandparent, an uncle, a country, and you remember it's a sense of home. And I said, you know, we can figure out a way to capture this as a cultural event and make a difference about that. And the state reaffirms, I'm rambling a little bit on this point, but the state said if we can document all of this, and the fact that we're like one of the last 10 or so remaining communities of this nature in the country, then we have something going. And so we pursued that with you saw us as SANS organization, and its purpose was to see if we could document the importance of the cultural efforts. That's it.
Follow up on what Renee's saying. When you think about that, when she's talked about the film, one of the things that I wanted to say, first, I had never heard of the series Home. And then I did some investigation. Many of the images and a lot of archival information and different things, Eastville was a part of that. But they said we only do one series, one episode domestically. And so what an honor that, you know, this community is highlighted to this much anticipated series. I thought that was definitely speaking to the significance of the community and the fact that it was very rare.
And if I could just add one last point. When the state visited us in 2016, they were amazed that we were here and the extent to which the community had held together and maintained. They said, never seen this before. Wow, what a find. And they were really a lot of the wind in our sail to move forward.
But there are many of us in that community with very deep roots and very deep history who do not want to let it go.
So, Georgia, my first question to you is, tell us about your participation in the film.
Well, you know, I think I was thinking when it first happened, because you have no idea, once this story broke, there were so many people coming at us, writers, producers, and just so much. I really didn't know what to expect. But as Renee said, I think about Tanner, and Tanner's been in many of the homes here, and I think about the integrity that the whole team would bring to the project. So I says, okay, I will participate, because I've said now to a lot of things. And so when we think about the images, we're in a 1920 Sears and Roebuck catalog order house, so we're really tiny, teeny tiny. But our collection really is largely photographs dating back from tintypes, daguerreotypes, to photos from the 20s to the 40s, and now we have a lot more contemporary art and some of the art from the residents that the collective creatives, community creatives that Bibi was talking about. And so we said, okay, we will participate. And so I just appreciated the integrity that they brought. So we don't give away our collection a lot because we're not a big institution and we're worried about copyrights. So we gave them a lot of the maps, we gave them images, we pointed them into some of the stories, like where you saw the Klan photos. I knew where they were, we made that available, and really talking about the backstory. Like, this just didn't pop up overnight, and so the fact that they were able to put in some of the other stories that would happen simultaneously was important to me. Like, this was an extraordinary thing that someone did when there was a depression. What about Jim Crow? And when we did the oral histories, when we were doing the designation and speaking to the many different age categories, like, there was a party line. Who the heck knows what a party line is now? You know, so I wanted some of those funny stories in to talk about that, and then thinking about the invitation, how you got there. So that was really important to me, that you really try to do a comprehensive story. And because we all know this, we've experienced this. A writer will come, you give them everything, you'll be like, this is what they decided to print? And for a historical society, it's so tough, and Brenda knows, and Sarah knows, we all know, that for a historical society, most of our documents are dating back to the newspaper and this and that. And it's just so surprisingly how completely wrong this stuff is. And this is the historic record for, when we're not here. People are gonna look at this. So that's my extent of making sure that everything that the society has done to try to preserve the community and the legacy. In the register, once we, as Eastville, did become a part of the Sag Harbor Historic District, that application, we were deeply involved, but we also noted in 1994 that, hey, these communities are important here. So that's what the founding members of Eastville wanted to make sure, that you pay attention to this, because we are part of the American society. This is American history, and we have contributed to the story that's here. And so that's what I wanted to make sure that I was able to do for the society, to make sure that what our mission is carried out here and anywhere else that we can have it carried out.
I always say this, it's time for us to tell our story.
Yes.
Anyway, my next question is for Dr. Winkler. In the film, your beautiful artwork is amazing to me.
Oh, thank you.
Is featured. Can you talk about your process, please?
My process, playing in the mud.
Yes.
That's basically what it is. I started doing pottery 50 years ago when I was a school teacher, before I ever went to dental school. So really my goal was to expand on that. So now I'm pretty entrenched in the clay world here in the East End. I'm on the board of the Clay Art Guild of the Hamptons, and we do different events and run classes. We have 2 teaching studios. So there's a very vibrant community of potters out here. But it's for me, it's a very personal and solo endeavor. It is my happy place, my happy activity. It's kind of like therapy. You just go and lose yourself in the day. So that's pretty much my process. I have my own studio, I have my kilns down there. We have clay delivered, and I do the whole process from start to finish. Well, thank you. Come see it anytime.
Ms. Renee, would you tell us about your journey as president of the SANS organization?
In life, some things fall on your feet. You're walking, and like a dog or something, just falls on your feet, and it needs food, right, or water, and you say, okay, and then you realize you can't get rid of it, so to speak. And what fell on my feet was the statement, again, there was nothing there, and how important could it be? And when I did my little bit of research, I realized, and you may have noted some, news now is picking up on residences in areas that were historically black, that were lost through eminent domain, or they redesigned through urban planning, highways through neighborhoods to disrupt them. I, as an undergraduate, was an urban affairs major looking at planning, so I was more sensitive to all of that as I was doing the research. And I realized there was nothing to protect the neighborhood long term. And if, generally speaking, the sentiment was that there's nothing there, then that's a problem. There used to be over 100 similar developments. These are planned communities, by the way. More than 100 of them around the United States. All of those 100, only about 5 to 10 exist today. Ours, SANS, is one. You heard about Martha's Vineyard. They referenced Highland Beach. I brought a book because I was just in Amelia Island called American Beach. Another one that it's in the Jacksonville area. Same thing, this one going back to the 1920s and 40s is still in existence. Most people do not know this American history. You mentioned about American history. Black history is American history. A lot of it has been lost, and I was concerned that SANS and its history would be lost. By the way, when they mentioned that many people couldn't get mortgages, that is very true. And it's also true that areas are redlined, like you cannot move there, right? Very true. What you don't understand is that we couldn't get mortgages, not that we were not credit worthy. We had the money for the down payments, but it didn't matter. And when they applied the GI Bill, it's not that we weren't GIs. You know and have heard about Tuskegee men and all the things that have happened. But the banks and the GI Bill, in many ways, was not applied to us. So our men and women who fought, while eligible, could not take advantage of that. So we had to have cash. So these 100+ areas had to have cash, Sag Harbor included, and yet they came up with this planned community that net today is about 150 acres, and with background by homes and families that go back generations. And for me, again, this fell on my lap, and I said, this is important, and it goes back to the old saying, and those of people in African American culture will know this, if not us, who? And if not now, when? And I was really pushed by that. I'm a 60s person, if you haven't picked up on that. You know, so I believe in right and equity and things of that nature. And this, to me, was something that I felt the history was not to be destroyed and thrown away like it didn't matter. I think people need to feel that all histories matter, and that's what got me into this. Enough?
I wanted to ask Brenda a question, because she's the moderator, but I think this is important. When we think about the arts, because we talked about the arts, I think it's so important to talk about the many musicians, the many artists that are still there. It's so important that we were an enclave of that, an enclave of creativity, exploration, and leisure, right? And so when I think about that, recently we worked on an app at the SAM Museum, and it speaks specifically about the Chitlin Circuit and the fact that, you know, Brenda, tell your story about, you know, the spoonful, loving spoonfuls in your father's place, because this was a place where we had, you heard in the film, Langston Hughes, you know, many other artists that have come through this as a sanctuary.
Lena Horne. Bill Pickens talked to me. Lena Horne was a house guest of his, often.
And Harry Belafonte had a house. And then there are a lot of artists like that you have here now, Nanette Carter and Frank Wimberly. Yeah, I said, but I would not forget Frank. A tremendous number of really accomplished artists in all areas of art have come through our community. And we need to celebrate all of them. So that's why we're trying to, like, bring this back again.
Yes. Okay, Georgia, I'll make this brief. My dad, Noah Simmons, owned the Cottage Inn in East Hampton. Anybody know anybody familiar with the Cottage Inn in East Hampton? Okay, put your hand up higher. Hello. Well, my dad owned the Cottage Inn, and my sister and I had this discussion whether my dad owned the Cottage Inn or he was just a cook. He was an excellent cook. So I Googled my dad's name, Noah Simmons, and then I Googled Cottage Inn. And if I wish I knew I was going to answer this question, I would have the book. There was a book that Stephen Boone, the bass player, wrote. And when I Googled my dad's name, this book came up. So make a long story short, the Loving Spoonfuls was featured at my dad's restaurant, the Cottage Inn. He would change it into, it was a juke joint, restaurant, and in the evening he would change it into a dance hall. And me and my sister would go down there and play during the day on this stage. We would play on the stage, play on the stage. One time she fell and she was cracked her head. But long story short, when I got this book, in this book, I really wish I had the book with me now, but in this book, Stephen Golden, who's the bass player, talks about how my dad gave them their first start in 1962. And as I read this book, and I forget what page it was on, I kept reading, and it talked about how he ended up bringing people like Ike and Tina Turner, James Brown, and all these people to the Cottage Inn, which is amazing. Does anybody remember any of that? Because I had someone do a tour, and they said they remember when James Brown had come there, and the line was down the road. So we have a lot of history, and that includes the chitlin circuit, as well. So we're like, like Vince said, we had so much history here, and we are determined to keep it alive. Okay, the last question, we had some index cards, we're gonna have to pass them up when you can. They have them?
There's index cards in the back table if people have questions. I don't know if Olivia's there, but there's index cards in the back if you had questions. Thank you, Monica.
Okay, this is the last question, and this is just Sarah. As a preservation specialist, can you tell us what it means to be successfully nominated as a state and national registered district?
Thank you, Brenda. So we were talking a little bit about the significance of the community, and the importance of the 60s. So one thing that was happening in the 60s, of course, was civil rights. Thinking about the state and national register kind of makes you think in a bigger frame of mind. So you were touching on, and you were touching on that home is a national or an international kind of program, and they really don't do many shows of buildings in the United States. So this is one. So to think about like what it means to the country, to people who may be living in Albany or in Buffalo or in the Adirondacks, why is it significant? Why was the state so impressed? The National Register of Historic Places was created in 1966 as part of the National Historic Preservation Act. And among things like civil rights that were going on in the 1960s was the demolition, and Renee spoke a little bit about it, whole-scale redevelopment of huge parts of the country. One very important thing that happened here, do you guys remember what happened in the 60s that kind of started a big movement for the National Register and National Historic Preservation Act? Penn Station, yes. So that really galvanized a lot of, especially people in the architectural kind of history world, but also people, who were getting just moved out of their community. So at the same time, folks like Robert Moses and other developers were putting highways through communities. So this was a really interesting time where there was a coalition of people interested in very high arts and design, so the architecture, but also the everyday. So there was a lot of people who grew up, my family, living in the city, going to Penn Station, lived their whole lives with Penn Station and knew it as a place that had meaning and significance to their everyday life. And of course, everybody in the city at the time probably came through that place. And across the country, even, people took the train into the city. So the loss of that building really galvanized a whole coalition of people to do something about it. And the National Historic Preservation Act was one of the things that came out of that. Which created the National Register. So what does the National Register do? It does this documentation we've been talking about. It's meant to be an archive of pictures, stories, drawings, maps, evidence. So all of these things we assembled as part of our nomination process. So that can be preserved for the American people. That is a national record of national culture and history and design, and everything that makes that place meaningful, there's now a record of that. that's officially in the Register of National History. And the same with the state
Library of
register.
Congress and held at Library of
Yes.
Congress.
Yes, so every national register, all of the materials, all the documentation goes to the National Archives. So that's there, no matter what happens, that there's some evidence and documentation of that place. And that's what the National Register is for, and the same with the State Register. So the State Register, New York State Historic Preservation Act comes a little bit later, 1980, but it's doing the same work as the National Register for the state. And why is SANS significant for the state and the nation? Well, you mentioned it. And in the films, really important for early ownership of property, especially at a time when people of color cannot own property. It is next to impossible. And I can't overstate the violence that people experienced in their everyday lives. I'm sure your families have stories, even into the 60s, up until civil rights. So there was 20 years where this community was a real refuge from violence, from very real violence. And people were being lynched across the country in the 1960s. So to have this place where people feel safe, that their children could be on the beach or in the street and not have to worry, that's a very, very rare place at this time in our country's history. And one of the figures who was mentioned in the first film was Amasa Lee Meredith. She and her sister were born in Lynchburg, Virginia, at a time when intermarriage was outlawed. So her father was a white carpenter and her mother was a black woman. They had to go to Washington, D.C. to be married because they couldn't get married in Virginia legally. Long story short, Amasa Lee Meredith ends up coming to New York during the Harlem Renaissance in the 1920s. Her and her sister, Maud, they end up going to the Columbia University because they're women and also people of color, but mainly because they're women. They could only go to the Teachers College, which is still a fabulous institution at the university. But Maud became a city school teacher, as was, I think, touched on briefly, and Amasa went on to found the arts department at Virginia State University, which was at the time a black college. And she worked there her entire career. And there is a house that is now the Alumni Association house on the campus that she built, and that's where she lived for the part of the year she was, teaching at the college, and then in summer she would come and stay with her sister's family. So the name of that house is Azurest South, and the name of course, the subdivision is Azurest, but if you look in her archives, which are at Virginia State University, she calls Azurest SANS Azurest North. So if you're in the archives looking at her work, you'll see things that refer to Azurest North, Azurest South. Those are the two different places. So again, that name, that kind of funny name that seems so funny, Azurest. And she, in her work, if you get into her work, and she's important because she was an artist designer. She also was an architect by sort of practical training, and she did a lot of interior design, but she did do design, she did do some architecture, kind of informally. So she really is one of the first African-American women to practice architecture that we know about in the United States. So very, very important, tremendously important figure, and to have this whole community kind of tied to her legacy and the legacy of women in the arts, people of color in the arts. It really kind of, this is still part of the story in SANS. So yeah, so it's so important because it has created this archive, it has recognized this story as part of the legacy of the people of the state of New York and the people of the United States of America. So that's why those two designations are so, so important.
You know, every time I hear "as your rest," I can't help but think it says "as you."
That's what I was going to say. Yes.
What she, that's exactly, that's intentional.
That was on purpose. I was going to say, if you want to some trivia parts, is that it comes from rest.
There's a restful place, and azure because the water was so blue. This is before the pollution and the boats and the stuff. So azure rest, that's where it came from. And the streets are actually some of the family names: Terry, Meredith, Richards, etc. That is there. Nineveh has some uniqueness. They have streets named after dead presidents. Lincoln, right? Harding, my mind just went blank. Taft, etc. Wilson, there you go. Don't like Wilson so much, but Wilson is there, and Lincoln is there. So I think it's a little bit of a tidbit. And then some of the people who lived there, Ron Brown, who was former Secretary of Commerce, his family still resides there. We have some other name correspondents, but I don't want to give their names, but they live there today. Then there are some other, I'm trying to think of some other quick names. Loads of people who were the first of. So you have a whole list of people, of first of this, first of that, who moved there, and because of the sense of community and safety.
Thank you so much. So we can we going to wrap up. We have a question here, and I wanted to answer this question, and then we will turn it over to Brenda to close us out. So one of the questions that I have here, it says these lands basically where, and not even just the SANS community, Eastville, but also where we stand today, is indigenous land. And of course, there is acknowledgement of the indigenous land here at this institution. And Eastville, if you look at our logo, our tagline is connecting three cultures, because our community is founded in that belief. When you look at what happened in Montauk, when the developer Benson came in, the indigenous people were in Eastville, which they would do during the warmer months. I mean, during the colder months, they would come inland and live there. And when they went back to Montauk, all of their houses, everything was gone. And so they established permanent residency, some of them permanent residency in Eastville. And so our tagline, and even the church was built by all three. The cemetery that we own and manage was built by indigenous, African American, and European descent. So we not only see that in the official record as far as being written, we see it in the built environment. And for us at Eastville, that's so important that we are able to document it in the physical buildings and environmental space. But also in the photo albums, we have a collection of photos called Collective Identity. Now with tintypes, you know, it's a one-off. It's almost kind of similar where it's a Polaroid and it's a one-off, but it's, so we found in two different houses, one at 11 Eastville Avenue, which is no longer the historic house that it was. There was an album that was found in there. And in that album, you see all three cultures. In the church, if you go inside, you'll see that all three cultures. So we not only have this by generations of oral history, story, and tradition, we do see it in the official record in the built environment. So we always acknowledge the fact that we have lived together, and not just the indigenous people, but also the enslaved Africans and the many people who came to this community that worked together. So that's a point of pride for us. And if you look at our logo, which I have been challenged, because if somebody could say it's a red face, a black face, and a white face. But an indigenous person did create mixed heritage. Joanne Carter, who was E.T. Williams' sister, she created our logo. And so I have pride in that because it really tells the story of who we are. But that's where Eastville has made sure that we continue to tell that legacy of all three populations living together. And we are one of the first and oldest multicultural communities where we can prove that existence from earlier on. So I just want to thank everybody, and I'm going to turn it over to Brenda to close us out.
I want to add one thing really quick. that I forgot real quick. On both the national and state registers of historic places, so the National Register has about 100,000 listings since it was created in 1966. So that's like a pretty long time to be, making listings. Only about 2 to 3% of those listings have something to do with the history of enslaved Africans in this country, African Americans, people of color. That's really, really unfortunate. So having SANS on the national and state registers starts to address this immense disservice to the contributions of these folks to not just Sag Harbor's history, but Long Island's history, the country's history, and human history, the tremendous contribution. So I hope that we'll see a lot more listings and that we can all celebrate this as part of our national and our community writ large. So it was a tremendous achievement and hopefully more to come. Thank you.
Thank you.